What's up everybody, J-Girl the Pessimist here. A few weeks ago, I uploaded a speedrun and chill video where I expressed my thoughts on the Resident Evil 9 game. Now, I don't expect everybody to agree with my opinions, but the response I got made me want to make an actual in-depth review of Requiem. In my video, I did a lot of criticizing while not doing a good job of highlighting what the game actually does right. In this review, I hope to rectify that by going over the game in its entirety, the goods and the bads. I want to touch on the comment that made me want to make this video as well. I was called pessimistic for criticizing the game, which, to quote the comment, is the most successful Resident Evil game of all time. I think that's ridiculous to assume that since a game is successful, it's immune to criticism. I'm honestly happy the game is successful and it has every right to be. It should also go without saying that before moving on, these are just my opinions. In the original video, I rated the game a 6.5 out of 10. Now when I look at a rating scale, I see a 5 as an average game. Anything over a 5 being better than average, and everything above say a 7 to be a pretty damn good game, with very little ever actually reaching a 9 or above. So to say that I disliked the game couldn't be any further from the truth. I genuinely enjoyed Requiem, and honestly, what I would hope is that this could act as a sort of gateway into the other entries of the franchise, as it managed to blend two game styles into one experience. The problem lies in the fact that while it did a good job at combining the elements of, say, the 2 remake and Resident Evil 7, it didn't really add anything to the mix to make it unique. You could get just as good of a survival horror game from playing 7, and an equally good shooter thriller from 2 and the 4 remake. What you end up with in Requiem is essentially two sides of the same coin that's already been flipped multiple times. To sum it all up, the story sees Grace Ashcroft, a timid and socially awkward FBI analyst, investigating mysterious deaths involving an unknown pathogen. Things take a turn when she is asked to investigate a death at the very same hotel her mother was murdered at 8 years ago. While searching for answers, she falls into the clutches of Victor Gideon, a former Umbrella researcher who helped with the T-virus. Victor believes Grace is the answer he's been searching for in regards to his research about the Ark's mind control and memory transference. In the process of capturing Grace, Victor is intercepted by Leon Kennedy, who is also investigating the mysterious deaths as they seem to all be connected to Raccoon City. Leon begins his search for Grace as well as his hunt for Victor, which sees them all at the Rhodes Hill Chronic Care Center. Throughout the journey, we see many memorable places like Raccoon City and RPD, along with some memorable faces like Alyssa Ashcroft, Sherry Birkin, Mr. X, and Hunk. Everything is leading us to a hidden research facility called the Ark, where we find a lot of lore that helps us piece together what exactly happened that led us to this point. The ending leads us to a standoff with Victor Gideon in order to get possession of a powerful antiviral, Elpis, which seems to cure pretty much everything. There is a second ending, but we'll get into that a bit later. Now, in my speedrun, I said I thought the story was pretty weak, and I still stand behind that statement. But I don't want to say the game's story isn't without some depth. So let's go through the story piece by piece and look at the good and the bad together. First things first, we have Grace being asked to investigate the site of another body at the same site her mother was murdered. Now, I've heard lots of people say that this seemed really odd, but it wasn't until we actually played through the game that the scene has a lot more going on than we thought. We're able to find documents that state plainly that the connections have an influence on pretty much everything, making sure the FBI would be investigating the deaths, even as much as to make sure Grace was the one who was working on the case before the body was even planted in the Wrenwood Hotel. Even without this knowledge, it doesn't even seem unreasonable to me, since the opening scene shows Grace investigating the very thing she's asked to look into next. The chief even tells Grace he won't make her do it if she's not comfortable with it.
Alyssa died 8 years ago. Grace, I won't force you to go. But do you think you can do this for me?
The added depth that the connections orchestrated it just gives more of an insight as to how much this organization is capable of. This is a great introduction to the game in my opinion, and it also shows us a lot about Grace before we even get to play the game. Speaking of Grace, I would like to actually step back from some things I said in my original video. I pretty much blasted her and wrote her off but the reality is she's actually a pretty well done character. We can see from everything leading up to the care center that she's a skittish, socially awkward desk jockey who really isn't used to field scenarios, especially not combat scenarios involving monsters. When you play as her, there's a lot of little things that go on that are really easy to miss. When she aims her gun, she shakes. Panicked, she'll talk herself down. She has very human reactions to a lot of the things that happen around her. She's emotionally motivated, which drives her actions, especially towards the middle of the game. There was a really nice development that happens over the course of the game, and honestly, I can admit that I was wrong when I said she was boring. I did have one small issue with the intro at the Wrenwood Hotel, and it had to do with the bag Alyssa hides behind the painting before getting partially decapitated while a man starts the building on fire. This building looks primarily made of wood, and yet the fire doesn't spread at all. But the damages were bad enough that they condemned the building. Let's just pretend that there was a fire truck or some sort of first responder immediately on site. I find it hard to believe that a business would fail to sell its assets before abandoning the location completely. Yet, after 8 years, this painting still sits where it hung, with the bag tucked snugly where it was. Moving forward, we now meet Leon, who is investigating the same deaths as Grace, but for different reasons. Everyone that's died has had a connection to Raccoon City. We see pretty quickly that Leon himself seems to be infected with something, as dark blotches cover parts of his hand and neck. While on his way to the Wrenwood Hotel, he ends up running into Victor as he casually walks around the city with an unconscious woman hung over his shoulder. Leon confronts him, but Victor begins infecting people and creating a panic, allowing him to escape while Leon deals with the chaos. This was the first part of the game where I audibly laughed, as it was incredibly ridiculous and honestly hilarious that Victor, a disfigured 8-foot-tall mad scientist that stayed hidden for years, just casually strolls out into the middle of the street like it's not going to draw attention to anybody. I'd make a comment about the sheer absurdity that Leon just happens to be driving by, but having played every game in the franchise, I know that Leon has main character syndrome, and honestly, this is pretty much exactly what I'd expect at this point. If Resident Evil games are nothing, they are consistent. We pivot again to Grace's perspective as she wakes up inside the care center. She is being tested on, but breaks out and begins looking for an escape. There's some small problem solving, good ambience, and overall a really nice horror sequence that set up the tone for the rest of the care center. Once confronted with the girl, we have to navigate a tight space with a giant monster and only a few safe spaces to rest. This sequence from a gameplay standard was exactly what I was hoping for. In my opinion, it was the most memorable part of the first playthrough. You have no tools, a behemoth is chasing you, it's leaping out of ceilings, crashing through walls, and trying to take a bite out of you. Your only real defense is light, as the girl can't handle it. It was peak survival horror, and then once you get away from the girl, we get a view of what's happening from Leon's perspective. Leon is invited to the care center only to have the whole thing go tits up. Zombies take over the ward, and in typical Leon fashion, he does what he does best, and blasts his way through them. Again, this is pretty much what I had expected when seeing Leon return. However, this was also the first time I felt a little disappointed. Just as quickly as it began, it ends. There's more walking down hallways than there is a fight sequence. Yeah, we get to see Leon be a badass, but then it's all just over. This is also where I had another issue with the writing. Leon finds Grace escaping from the girl and helps her escape. In no time, he and Grace are separated, leaving him to confront Victor. Now, we mentioned Leon having main character syndrome, so it didn't shock me when he immediately opts to let his guns do the talking, only to get punished by Victor. This wouldn't have been an issue if it wasn't for the fact that the very next sequence involving Leon, he manages to fistfight Victor after being tied to a chair. To me, this didn't make any sense. Either he's able to match Victor or he isn't. They could have just made him get knocked unconscious from something else, instead of painting this power scale for Victor only to diminish it in the very next scene. Anyway, back to Grace. She's now alone in the main care center, but with a parting gift from Leon, the Requiem, which is a powerful hand cannon capable of killing several zombies at once and stunning large monsters, but its ammo is relatively scarce. This is another really nice touch they added to Grace to emphasize that she's not experienced with this type of situation. When she fires the Requiem for the first time, she's physically staggered by the recoil. As she begins to navigate the care center, she finds a room with a dead man and 2 glass cells, one empty and the other one having a small blind child named Emily inside. Grace has no way to get in or out and is forced to investigate the care center. In doing so, she finds a door that's locked with 3 small slots for something to be inserted, as well as several doors with security clearance locks. This section consists of looking for the 3 cubed objects to insert into the door in order to escape, while also getting higher security clearance to free Emily. This section was yet again very well done in my opinion. The center is big enough, with enough going on to keep you on your toes. Resources are limited, at least on the standard classic, which is what I ran on in my first playthrough. There are crafting recipes to unlock which are hidden behind puzzles, along with a new item that I was personally really fond of, the hemolytic injector, which acts as a stealth mechanic for Grace. It wasn't until getting the final puzzle box that I really felt a sense of, are we really doing this? The final cube we need was in a box behind a combination written in Braille. Not only did I instantly flash back to running around babysitting Sherry Birkin in Resident Evil 2, but the puzzle that was presented was so brain-dead simple that I feel like an FBI analyst should have been able to figure it out. 2 repeating buttons and then one after another. We can also say without a doubt that there was no penalty for failing, as if you type the incorrect sequence on the other boxes, it simply resets. But of course, we have to run back, have to go get Emily, and we have to have her unlock the box. This is a point I mentioned in my original video about how it wouldn't have mattered if Grace would have solved the problem on her own. She would have undoubtedly returned to save Emily, without ever having to put her in the path of flesh-eating monsters in the first place. For me, this was the point in the story where things began to decline. Not drastically, but it began to do what all Resident Evil games tend to do, and it moved right into the bounds of over the top. Emily gets kidnapped by the girl while helping Grace, and then we switch back to Leon. Leon is interrogated by Victor, and while I explain that Leon lays the beat down on him, this scene does show one thing that is important, and that is that Victor's character is arrogant, and in several parts of the game, he proves this, which makes some of the weird decisions he makes more believable. He could have just killed Leon and been done, but he didn't. He already believed that he had won. After Leon proves him wrong, he is off to navigate the same section of the care center that Grace had just moved on from. This is something worth mentioning that I thought was pretty interesting. The items throughout the level are shared between the 2 paths. If Grace picks up an herb, it's gone when Leon comes around. Again, it's a small thing, but I actually thought it was a nice touch. But on the flip side, this is another section that I felt was really short. Even on my first playthrough, the Leon sections were barely a fraction of Grace's. Returning to Grace, we find ourselves in a lower level of the care center and need to acquire battery plugs in order to rescue Emily from a cell that the girl has put her in. This part is decent, essentially acting as a miniature version of the previous segment. Navigate the area, acquire pieces to slot into a power source, free Emily. All while zombies and the girl stalk you. The path is pretty open and requires a little bit of decision making in order to complete, which is nice. It's not just a linear collectathon. The only part in this section that I thought was over the top was the body processing section. You essentially get to sit and wait while bodies get sucked into a meat grinder. This was pretty lackluster and just served as a way to make the segment take longer. This is a theme that kind of stuck with me, as I believe moving forward there are several moments like this that only serve to take time. Had they taken all of these scenes and used them to add to other parts of the game, I think it would have really added to the overall gameplay without making it feel like you're just waiting for something to happen. Once you finally collect all the plugs and free Emily, you take a short elevator ride before escaping from the girl once again. Emily reveals that she had the final cube needed to escape, and you're finally out of the care center. It's important to note at this point that pretty much every Resident Evil game has a moment in the game where things go completely overboard into the level of absurdity. So it's only fitting that around this point is exactly when that begins to happen. Grace finds a man named Harry who can fly her and Emily to safety, but unfortunately his keys are still inside a super secret lab right in the care center's backyard. Grace opts to go get them so they can all get out of Dodge. Of course, nothing is ever easy, and once Grace gets the keys, our good friend Victor shows up talking to a man named Zeno before setting the facility to self-destruct. This entire facility has a massive blood tank reactor of sorts that explodes, essentially flooding the place with processed corpse juice. There was one thing about this scene that I have heard others complain about that I can understand, but I also don't overly feel bothered by it. In order to get into the facility, Grace needs to activate an elevator of sorts that takes an entire office, turns it into an elevator, and goes all the way down to the lab. How did Victor not know someone was in the lab the second he realized the elevator had been used? It's fair logic, but in that same vein, there are 2 exits, meaning there are 2 entrances. It's not impossible to assume that Victor entered and exited the same way Grace exits. Once she returns to Harry, they get in the chopper and they make a quick escape. Just kidding, they get immediately swamped by zombies and crash the helicopter, killing Harry and wounding Emily in the process. This is the start of what I mean when I say things get over the top. But the Resident Evil universe is full of human beings surviving impossible feats, so I'll let it slide. We move on to Leon in Victor's office as a helicopter comes crashing into the courtyard just a roof length away. Leon does what Leon does best, and he shoots his way through enemies while Grace attempts to get to safety. Once all the bad guys are gone, Grace flees into a church and Leon is short behind her. This is where we are introduced to the first boss, or mini-boss, which I was honestly a little disappointed with. It's essentially a reskinned version of the Lepotitsa from Resident Evil 6, except instead of gas, it's pus. And instead of turning people into zombies, it's turning zombies into mutated blister heads. This is the first moment in the game where I thought to myself, hey, I think they're nodding back to past titles. You fight the Lepotitsa in a church in 6 as well. This would become a common theme as I played that got very old, very fast, but I'll get more into that later. Next we have the last Grace segment of any real substance as you are forced to deal with the girl while Emily lies wounded in the storage room. This fight isn't really a fight, but it doesn't lose anything by not being one either. You have to navigate tight spaces while the girl chases you in order to turn levers that expose the girl to light, which weakens her. Once you turn all the levers, you have to press another button that opens a panel on the ceiling, flooding the arena with sunlight, allowing Grace to put the monster down for good. Unfortunately for her, when she goes to move Emily, she finds her mutated into a beast of her own. Thankfully, our hero Leon is there to save the day, while Grace begs him not to kill her. Leon says, "Fuck nah," and blasts the shit out of her repeatedly for fun. The game forcing you to aim directly at her heart to deal the final blow. Now remember that, because that's important. We'll come back to that. Grace is reasonably upset with Leon. She had an emotional attachment to Emily, and she failed to save her. She blames herself and essentially gives up. She willingly joins the man we've heard about earlier named Zeno and Victor, which at this point, I'm sure everyone thought the same thing. Zeno's just Wesker the sequel. This is the last we see of Grace for a while as we pivot to Leon as he attempts to track her down. Leon is led to face his past, and with a name like Requiem, most people have had to see this coming. He finds himself back in Raccoon City and was greeted with a throwback within minutes of getting there. A giant spider attacks Leon, which was a great nod to the original game and Zero. It chases you through a building and acts as a nice little boss to fight to welcome Leon back. The unfortunate thing about this is the last we're going to see of the spider mutations. I think there was one section where you can find baby spiders, and on Insanity, I think there's one additional spawn as well. In my opinion, this is a completely wasted opportunity. You could have really showed what happened to Raccoon City when the T-Virus had nothing to keep it in check. Again, this is not the only instance of this happening either. We simply throw something in the player's face in order to say, "Hey, I remember this," and then we never see it again. Once our spider is dead, we enter another area of the city that's blocked off, but a former BSAA camp has the components for a bomb that'll allow our main man Leon to get past. This part of the game acts as a Leon mirror to the Grace and the Care Center. You locate 3 things, you put them in a designated point, and you get the fuck out of there. Nothing about this part is necessarily bad,
but the exploration aspect of the game plateaued at this point. It was very linear with almost no reason to stray from the beaten path. There's one door that you need a crank for, and another small passage that leads to a BSAA crate, but outside of an achievement or two, there's really no reason to do either. While collecting bomb pieces, you may come across a moment that felt familiar as Leon runs across a rooftop. Various enemies launch mortars at you. To me, this felt very similar to the catapults from Resident Evil 4. Once you finally collect 3 pieces, there's a small sequence that sets Leon right before the exit. And wouldn't you guess, it's the exact same elevator segment ripped also from 4. I'm all for nods to the franchise, but this game got to a point where it seemed like that's all it was doing. Babysitting segments, reskinned enemies, enemies you only see once, an entire moment reskinned from another game. And this was only the beginning. Now, it's worth saying that I do think some of the throwbacks were really cool, and I appreciated them, while others just kind of seemed unnecessary. The next part was the absolute most ridiculous portion in the entire game, while at the same time being the exact type of shit I would expect Leon to do. I personally despise this section of the game, but I didn't hold that against the game because I knew these were the types of absurd bullshit that Resident Evil games always like to throw in. Leon gets on a motorcycle and he begins a moving fight scene with Victor while some infected wolves chase him. Personally, I felt my soul leave my body when I watched Leon ride a fucking motorcycle up the side of a collapsed building and then ramping off of it only to land on the other side. That was too fucking much, even for Leon S. Kennedy standards. To end things off, Victor and Leon have a small scuffle before fucking jousting on motorcycles with guns. Oddly enough, the jousting seemed perfectly fine. It ends with Leon crashing Victor's bike before Victor gets dragged off a cliff and consumed by an explosion. This segment, well, I personally didn't like it, wasn't the worst, but it repeated a problem previously mentioned. Those wolf monsters looked fucking cool. It was a major letdown that they never show up in the story, and they only show up in a mostly scripted scene and then disappear out of the blue. They had a lot of possible enemy combinations that they could have had to make a truly terrifying Raccoon City experience. Instead, we got zombies, blisterheads, and some zombies with guns. Credit where it's due, there was one of the big pus zombies in one single instance. Moving right along, we take our motorcycle and we drive to a very familiar place, the RPD. Now this was an example of a very welcome throwback. We get actual nods to Leon's past that aren't just cookie cutter bullshit. Leon sees his welcome banner on the ground. He pays tribute to Marvin. There are secrets to be found in the old STARS office. Bodies that were there are still there from 28 years ago. This was all great, and I really enjoyed it. The best part being when Leon confronts Zeno and Grace only to have an unwelcome reunion with Mr. X. Leon keeps his one-liner sharp as you get another showdown with the Tyrant. In between Leon actually confronting Zeno and reacquainting himself with Mr. X, we have another one of those segments that I mentioned earlier that seemed like it was only there to waste your time. The orphanage section. It's very slow, it's very boring, and when played the way it's intended to be, it's just a lot of standing around waiting for literally anything to happen. I think it says a lot when the speedrun community is asking for a category that cuts an entire section out of the game, because it tells you just how little substance it had in the first place. The whole portion took place 8 years before the events of Resident Evil 2, and yet the daycare is set up the exact same way. The whole thing could have been a skippable cutscene, and you would have lost nothing for doing so. If anything, they could have taken the time they spent working on the orphanage and put it into different parts of the game. When the boring-ass orphanage flashback ends, Leon finally gets his fight with Mr. X before moving on to the now decimated orphanage. As he makes his way through the rubble, an infected plant causes him to tumble into a ravine. leading to yet another scene that felt ripped right out of Resident Evil Village as Leon descends a long rope surrounded by black tendril vines. A short segment of passing through these plants leads to a boss fight with Plant 43, which also seemed a little familiar to me. The boss consists of 2 side tendrils that attack, and a main tendril that has a mouth, when opened, acts as a weak spot. Sounds a lot like the Salazar fight from the original Resident Evil 4 to me. Finally, we make our way to the Ark, a secret facility used by Umbrella and the Connections in order to acquire Elpis. The problem is they don't have the right password to unleash it, and any wrong passwords will destroy the project. This is where Grace comes in and why Zeno and Victor wanted her all along. Leon finds her location and makes his way to intervene before being intercepted by the one and only Hunk. After a super lackluster fight, Leon kills the Grim fucking Reaper and waltzes on by to stop Zeno. This was a massive disappointment for me, as again it just felt like they were taking every ounce of nostalgia sauce, dipping their fucking nuts in it, and shoving it down my throat. There is one way that this scene could be redeemed, and that would rely on some sort of DLC that had a side story following Hunk and his crew throughout the events of 9. I could maybe forgive this, but as it stands, on release, this was just an overkill kick in the nuts. Leon eventually makes his way to Zeno, where he realizes that he is truly a Wesker ripoff, able to move impossibly fast, regenerate, and having superhuman strength. However, he does do the most Leon thing he can possibly do by shooting down a piece of the platform they're on before riding the falling metal to safety, grabbing Grace along the way. Now we get to play as Grace again for about 20 minutes if you're brand new, and maybe 8 to 10 if you played the game at least once. This sequence is once again underwhelmingly short, requiring the player to run basically back and forth between a whole 4 rooms until they unlock a surveillance room. The room has information on Grace and how she ended up with Alyssa. Turns out Alyssa was researching Oswell Spencer. You know, the power-hungry, power-of-God-seeking madman with delusions of grandeur. You know, the guy who unleashed hell on an entire population center, murdered multiple people, tortured multiple people, and was entirely evil in every sense of the fucking word. Yeah, well, he changed his mind. He had a change of heart, and he made an antivirus that cures everything. This was laughably fucking terrible. If I'm expected to believe this psychopathic, power-hungry monster just decided to turn a new leaf, the only way Spencer would have made Elpis was as a failsafe in case someone else succeeded where he failed. But they couldn't do that, because that would have completely turned Grace into an irrelevant character. This is a primary example of piss-poor writing. Now that I'm done ranting about the shit sandwich I was served while watching that fucking cutscene, we can finally rejoin with Leon as he makes his way through the Ark. Similar to Grace, this section was maybe 10 minutes long before we have yet another nostalgia piss blast, straight from Resident Evil 2 Remake. Leon is on his last legs as a very slow, discolored, and warped effect overlays the screen while you walk for probably a minute and a half down a hallway. It just leads to a cutscene. Just make the whole fucking thing a cutscene then. He collapses right in front of the door he needs to go through before we transition back to Grace for maybe 30 whole seconds. She enters an elevator and walks down the exact same hallway only to find Leon. Together, they go to face Zeno and put an end to Elpis. Now this is where you might expect a fight against a superhuman ripoff, but instead, Grace releases Elpis before informing everybody that it's not actually a weapon, it's a cure. Zeno had already shot himself up with the ghoul green Kool-Aid only to be beheaded without so much as a second fucking glance. Meanwhile, Grace shoots up Leon with that good shit. Before we get into the finale, I want to take a minute to discuss Zeno. I have dug a little into his character and I understand the implications that come with him. The Connections were researching ways of transferring memories, abilities, and pieces of one person into another. I'm led to believe that Zeno is some sort of result of this, with his abilities coming from no other than Albert Wesker. Even Victor makes mention at Zeno being just an imitation.
You are nothing. but an imitation.
This has a lot of potential to lead into future games, as now characters who are dead can essentially be reborn. But even with all of this exposition, Zeno is still a dog shit addition to this game, as he isn't even in the fucking game. Not a fight, not a chase, nothing. He shows up in a whopping 4 cutscenes and then fucking dies in the most anticlimactic way. 1 second he's Wesker 2, the next he's beheaded and no longer even fucking relevant. Victor, on the other hand, does return, which for me was no surprise. He had also mutated, just like you'd expect a final boss to, pretty much like most of the other Resident Evil games. He plans to use Elpis in the way I had pretty much described Spencer most likely would have. He sets the station to self-destruct, causing the entire platform to collapse, leaving Victor, Leon, and Grace deep within the Ark for a final showdown. The final boss fight is pretty good and fairly standard for most modern Resident Evil games. We fight Victor pre-mutation, then we learn he's infected with a nemesis virus, which mutates him into a monstrosity. The fight consists of popping blood blisters and then dodging a few attacks before repeating the process. All resulting in a quick time event that ends the main game. The final cutscene showing Leon and Grace trapped, accepting their demise before none other than Chris Redfield's elite squad shows up to rescue them. Once safely outside of the Ark, Leon calls Sherry, telling her he also has a vial of Elpis just for her, which is bullshit, because we see Victor destroy the remaining vials along with the entire platform it was stationed on. He also has the audacity to go up to Grace and tell her that they can still save Emily because he actually never shot her in vitals.
Grace, I didn't hit any of her vitals. She could still be alive.
You never shot her in the vitals, even though you shoot her in the heart like fucking repeatedly. This is the second most egregious addition to the story apart from Spencer. Not only is it just blatantly fucking false, as the game forces you to shoot the bitch directly in the chest in order to trigger the next cutscene, but he also still shouldn't have any Elpis, as it's all fucking destroyed. This is one of those things that I still truly believe from my original video. Emily was really just a MacGuffin to begin with. She only served as an irrelevant plot device to get Grace to the Ark with Zeno in the first place. Grace's character develops after she believes Emily is dead because she thinks it's her fault. After she works with Leon, she can now relate to him in the mentality that you can't save everybody. The game is called Requiem, for fuck's sake. But in Grace's case, it's just a fucking fairy tale where she lives happily ever after. Unless, of course, you choose the bad ending, which is just ridiculous in its own right, and I don't even know why they added it in the first place. Long story short, Grace destroys Elpis, Leon gets his head exploded like a watermelon, and Grace leaves feeling really shitty about it. That's it. The only reason this ending exists is to save me 20 seconds on a speed run. Overall, this game starts off very strong, and it gradually degrades. The degradation is not a straight beeline into the ground though. The story is flat, but the gameplay is consistent, and it's overall mostly enjoyable. Some key problems are the portions of the game that just feel like you're wasting your time, especially when there are sections of the game that feel kind of empty and short when they don't need to be. Turn the orphanage into a 1-minute cutscene in order to expand on the Ark a little bit. The constant barrage of nostalgia is both appreciated and fucking obnoxious. RPD and Mr. X? Good. Wasted enemies, reskinned portions, and killing off characters with seemingly no reason? Bad. There's also the issue with price versus play. In my opinion, the game felt super short. My first playthrough, completely blind, took only 7-8 hours. Outside of speedrunning the game, the only real replayability of value is Insanity mode. It took me less than 30 hours to have every single unlockable and achievement in the game. Meanwhile, they charged $10 more than every other modern Resident Evil game. That is why I confidently stick with my original rating of 6.5 out of 10. I'm happy the game is so successful, but it is far from a masterpiece. everything I've said aside, we know that there's going to be DLC coming to the game, which could expand the story as well as maybe add various forms of replay value, which would drive my opinion a little higher. But that DLC better be free, or there's absolutely no hope of that. Anyway, if you made it this far, I really want to thank you for your time, and hopefully my pessimism didn't send you into a keyboard smashing frenzy. I don't expect everybody to agree with my opinions, or maybe any of them for that matter. If nothing else, hopefully you can look at the original point that brought me here differently. Just because something is successful doesn't make it perfect. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.
I didn't hit any of her vitals.
Wait! Oswell Spencer just sponsored this video. He had a change of heart and decided to stray from making viruses and start making jitterless energy drinks that taste like it's been milked from a fucking unicorn. Dubby makes that clean, great-tasting beverage that helps me create pessimistic, opinionated dog-shit reviews on games that are totally immune to criticism because their Metacritic score is above a 73. Use the promo code JGoodLoser at checkout and get an extra 10% off your order. I'm straight jorking my nemesis, and you could be too, with Dubby.
Please kill me.
Rock